Hello again and welcome to another edition of Newsmaker of the Week. I'm Leon Warden and I'm pleased to welcome this week's Newsmakers from the Castaic Lake Water Agency, the board president Tom Campbell, and CLWA Executive Director Dan Masnada. Is that your title, Executive General Manager Dan Masnada. And welcome, and let's see. So what's been going on the last 50 years of the Castaic Lake Water Agency? No, you actually have, I guess this is probably some of the among the most momentous news of the last 50 years for the agency. You're looking at taking over Valencia Water Company. Tell me about it.
In this case, our board voted last week on Wednesday to acquire all of the stock of the Valencia Water Company. It's an item that we've been discussing for some time. We've had numerous strategic planning sessions over the years, and we've identified the need to manage the water resources in the valley in a comprehensive manner. It encourages things like correct water resource management and conjunctive use, and it's something that we've been trying to work toward, and we finally saw this opportunity and we've decided to undertake it. Now,
I suppose for the benefit of most of our viewers who might not pay as close attention to Castaic Lake Water Agency and water issues as some of us do, we should explain Castaic Lake Water Agency is the state water wholesaler. The water comes down out of, I don't know, the mysterious ether or something, and it comes through this big pipe, and it comes to us, and the Castaic Lake Water Agency parcels it out to various water retailers, which are the Valencia Water Company, the Newhall County Water District, the County Waterworks District 36 in Castaic Valverde, and then the Santa Clarita Water Company, which is one of the four retailers, and it's owned and operated by the Castaic Lake Water Agency. So just to confuse things more if possible, you already are you're a state water wholesaler for the whole valley, but you're operating as a water retailer, the agency that actually delivers water to people's tap in part of the valley through the Santa Clarita Water Company. Or Santa Clarita Water Division, you're calling it now, Castaic Lake Water Agency. So it wouldn't be a brand new thing to operate as a retailer. Why is it in anybody's interest for Castaic Lake to own the Valencia Water Company, which is wholly owned by the Newhall Land and Farming Company?
I think Tom touched on it. It'll result in better management of the valley's water supply portfolio. It'll also allow the agency to realize the economies of scale in delivering water to the end users by owning a utility or a combined utility that represents about 84% of the connections in the valley. Of course, this will be long term. That'll occur, but ultimately it'll help reduce rate increases in the future.
What will the current customers of the Valencia Water Company, what kind of change will they see?
I think at the beginning they won't see any change at all. We will be operating the Valencia Water Company as a separate entity for some time as we perform studies to see how the best way to merge the two together to achieve those economies of scale. Mm-hmm. So in the short term, there will be a seamless transition. And then in the long term, as we're able to combine the two retail divisions, we look to have some cost savings from those economies of scale.
Now you say operating, but isn't it the case that initially you're going to be owning and not operating? Or are you going to be operating from day one?
The Valencia Water Company will continue to exist as a separate entity.
Okay.
And they will continue to operate. So it'll be the same staff, the same people that read the meters, that you call on the phone, that produce the bills, no change.
Now, structurally, politically, governmentally, whatever, there's the Castaic Lake Water Agency law that Kathy Wright, I think, wrote back in the late 70s or around 1980 or so.
87 or
87 was
I think
yeah, 86,
the one that
87,
Kathy Wright was
right.
involved in was about 87.
Right,
so.
And that kind of laid out how Castaic Lake Water Agency operates.
Actually, at that time, it expanded the board to have the representation from the retailers, assess connection fees or facility capacity fees to support development of infrastructure for new users. and the legislation that related to the operations, if you will, was in 2000, I think, after the Santa Clarita acquisition.
That came later. I know.
Right.
But yeah, right. Kathy Wright's law. I mean, Castaic Water Agency has an elected board, has a board of 11, or at least last I knew it had, I don't remember what happened the last 12 years, but last I knew it had a board of 11 people, of whom 7, like Tom here, were elected, and then at the time the 4 water retailers, which I just mentioned, kind of alphabet soup of names, each had a representative on the CLWA board to fill out those other 4 seats. And now turn up the clock to 99, around in there, when CLWA decided it wanted to purchase the Santa Clarita Water Company, which had been Bill Bonelli's water company, for a privately owned water company, for pretty much ever, for all intents and purposes. And I guess CLWA bought that for like $63 million or something like that. And
He was right on.
had to, and I guess at the time it was learned that, what? Remind me. My memory isn't what it used to be. That CLWA could own it but not operate it at that time. Is that how it came down?
There was a question about the operations. Actually, Tom was on the board when that legislation.
I may have followed just after
okay.
I joined the board in 2001. But from my understanding is we required legislation to convert the director's seat for the appointed retailer. The one that represented the private entity, Santa Clarita Water Division, needed to become an elected member.
Right, George Renner carried that bill, but also there was a change to the legislation that was needed that enabled Castaic Lake Water Agency to operate the Santa Clarita Water Company as a wholly owned and wholly operated division of CLWA. But as I recall, that legislative change applied only to the boundaries of the Santa Clarita Water. That Castaic Lake, as it stands right now, by law, last I knew, Castaic Lake Water Agency can only operate as a retailer within the boundaries of the Santa Clarita Water, the old Santa Clarita Water Company.
That's correct.
And not elsewhere. So right now, by state law, you don't have the ability right now to operate the Valencia Water Company. You can own it, but you can't yourselves operate it. Is that right? What I'm asking is, you're going to be going to Scott Wilk or Steve Knight or somebody and asking them for new legislation that would enable CLWA to operate Valencia Water Company, right?
At some point, we may do that.
Okay.
Initially, it's the entity is going to be operated subject to PUC jurisdictional oversight.
Just like it always has
it'll
been.
It'll continue operating, and then the board or the ad hoc committee of the board that was established to oversee this effort has talked about the approaches that we would use to operate the entity after it goes public.
Right.
And we believe there's some approaches that don't immediately require the legislation. And I think, hopefully I'm not going too far in saying this, that ultimately when the legislation would be more of a luxury than a necessity ultimately.
Okay.
The legislation would allow us to fully realize those cost savings by fully integrating the two of the entities.
Right, because I would imagine that's a big issue going. I mean, that's a big justification for doing it. I mean, we've got duplication of certain at least administrative functions, and probably a lot of other different kinds of operational functions, but a lot of duplication in having those separate, relatively small water purveyors serving different, kind of like you have with school districts. We have 4 different little quote-unquote school districts in this town, 1 high school district, but 4 different elementary school districts, and you can imagine that there's probably some certain administrative duplication there if everything were one entity.
Right.
You'd be able to realize those efficiencies that you were talking about.
And conflicting school schedules. As one that has kids in both districts,
That's right.
There's always a conflict in the schedules. And that kind of illustrates the point of the conjunctive and water use efficiencies. When you have different retailers that are operating independently, they exercise their own judgment. Even though we closely coordinate water use and water supply, we don't have that ultimate control. And by combining them, we can do that. And then we are able to schedule water so that we can take advantage of state water in wet years, and we can reserve the groundwater for use in later dry years. That's the conjunctive use.
Because right now, each of those 4 retailers in town is operating its own way in a lot of respects, but with respect to how much state water it's going to use, how much it's going to pump out of the ground. You could be across the street from an agency that's using entirely state water, and you could live where somebody is using some state water, some groundwater, and of course,
And paying different rates. And that situation does exist in the valley.
yeah. And I'm trying to get to this.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention real quick, just to follow on what Tom had said, is that Valencia Water, in taking it public, will be able to utilize federal funding and pursue public-type financing for the utility that otherwise is not available to it at less cost than private financing.
Which is transparent to users, except at such time as they're paying their property taxes. Well, there's a CLWA rate that's on the property taxes, which I would imagine that everybody pays, which I would imagine pays a lot of the debt on the different kinds of debt instruments.
No, actually, the state water project, ad valorem property tax, as we call it, pays for the valley's share of the state water project capital and operating and maintenance.
Okay.
Our wholesale water rate that we charge to the retailers directly and is incorporated in their retail rate covers strictly the local operations.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and operations,
okay.
not even capital. That's funded separately to ensure that existing residents don't fund infrastructure that benefit future residents.
So water rates pay the entire cost of the local
Of the
operations.
CLWA wholesale operation.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. Before I forget, Newhall Ranch, the future 21,000 home community west of I-5 that Newhall Land and Farming Company, which owns Valencia Water, is looking to build. And maybe that'll happen one day. Maybe it won't. Who knows? I mean, it's supposed to happen 10 years ago, so it's been a long time since I thought about that too. But as I recall, I was trying to think. I couldn't remember what Newhall Land or whoever, or whatever they are today, plans to do for water. I couldn't remember if they were going to use Valencia Water Company to deliver water to Newhall Ranch, or I thought I remembered something about maybe forming a separate water company.
I don't know about the formation of a separate water company. Valencia Water Company was wholly owned by Newhall Land and Farming and was able to serve as their supplier for all of their developments. But as far as water supply for Newhall Ranch, back when Newhall Land and Farm was going through the approval process, they were required to purchase water. They purchased water from, it's called Nickel Water, an entity up in the Central Valley. It's Kern River water. And that water was dedicated for use on the Newhall Ranch project. And this deal does nothing to change that. Newhall Land Farm Company, or the entity as it's called now, still continues to own that, and that is the future supply for.
But what company gets it from Kern River to people's taps in the future Newhall Ranch? Is it?
That was an open question before. Now that Castaic Lake Water Agency is involved with Valencia as one of our entities, Castaic can serve as the mechanism to bring that water supply down through the state water project.
Is the Newhall Ranch within the boundaries of a water purveyor?
It's within the boundaries of the Castaic Lake Water Agency. Right. And also, to add to what Tom had just said, there was the nickel water, but initially, or the initial water that was identified as part of the Newhall Ranch specific plan that was approved by the county is a conversion of agricultural groundwater that Newhall Land has historically used and continues to use to this day for agricultural operations. So that, in combination with the nickel water and recycled water generated by the groundwater, would have constituted or constitutes the supply that was identified for the Newhall Ranch specific plan. And it's always been, and Valencia Water was going to be as that groundwater is converted and the nickel water developed or brought into the valley, the cost to treat the imported water would have been reimbursed to the agency, but ultimately all that water would be delivered by Valencia Water Company through an expansion of its service area. So we anticipate that the Valencia Water Company's service area will be expanded as that development occurs.
Okay. Who makes that decision about expanding the Valencia Water Company's service area? Who approves that, I should say?
Historically, the Public Utilities Commission.
Yeah, okay.
Once it comes into the once the agency converts it to a public entity, it'll be the Castaic Lake Water Agency that will be pursuing the expansion. But again, it's in our service area, so the agency has
Right.
that
So
right.
ultimately, at this point, as it stands, the entity that you are about to own will serve water, and if barring a legislative, or if there's a legislative change, then Castaic Lake Water Agency itself would operate the company that serves Newhall Ranch. Okay. Talk to me about price and the determination of that, because I don't. Is this done? I mean, there weren't any other suitors for. How did this come about? There weren't any other suitors for Valencia Water Company who just woke up one day and decided, oh, this would be a good day for CLWA to buy Valencia Water, or conversely, oh, this would be a good day to sell that darn thing to CLWA.
More the latter than the former, but I'll turn that over to Tom. So.
I don't think it started just this year. It's something that happened 2 or 3 years ago. I believe it was 2009 when LandSource, who was the owner of LNR and Lennar, the entity that owned Newhall Land and Farm, was in bankruptcy. And it was considered that Valencia Water Company may be up for sale as part of the bankruptcy.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
My understanding is that were at least 4 entities that were interested and provided offers in response to that potential. Although Newhall Land and Farm and their corporate entities never decided to sell the water company and came out of bankruptcy with it, there was interest in the company from others. And it was a result of that, that discussion early on, several years ago, that Newhall Land and Farm approached us last year and requested that we negotiate exclusively and confidentially for the sale.
Okay.
On a essentially a willing buyer, willing seller basis.
Right. So price. How is the price determined? And I mean, I guess maybe it doesn't affect people when they pay their property taxes, but at least it could ultimately affect the ratepayers within the current Valencia Water Company ratepayers. How would they? Yes, I understand PUC approves, but how is price determined, and how is that going to impact anybody in the current service area?
As part of the public process, we are required to appraise the property, and the offer amount was based on an appraisal. So
Okay.
it is a valid appraised
What's that
amount.
number?
$73.8 million, but then it's adjusted. There's $24 million worth of debt that's subtracted from that. And then there's about $9 million of cash that's added back in, so we're paying, for that $9 million, we're paying cash for cash.
Right.
We're looking at essentially a closing price of about $58.6 million.
Yeah, I don't really have a point of reference to compare that to. I mean, I think about Santa Clarita Water and 63 million. How do they compare in size? And of course, that was a dozen years ago. So,
Actually, Vice President Cooper, who would have been here today, and I got to sub for him, he had actually run some quick numbers that, if I remember correctly, mentioned during the board meeting that on a per customer basis or per connection basis,
right.
this acquisition price is about $500 per customer less. And there's a number of factors that play into that, but it's
On a percentage
on that
basis?
basis. I think with Santa Clarita was about something close to $3,000, so
Okay.
500 of the 3,000, 1/6, whatever the math is.
Yeah, I needed a reference there.
There you go.
$500 savings off of $5 million per customer. No. There you go.
And in response to your question about the rates, the intent is not to change the rate to fund the purchase. Similar to what was done with Santa Clarita Water Company prior, when you convert a wholly owned private enterprise into a public utility owned by the agency, we no longer have to pay dividends, we no longer have to pay certain taxes and other things. those monies are what we're going to use to finance the acquisition.
Are there
Essentially self-funding.
Yeah. Do you have certain priorities for changes with whether you're operating it yourself or telling the operator what to do? Are there certain ways that CLWA wants Valencia Water to change what it's doing?
I'll take a crack at that. Not really. Initially, as we mentioned, it'll be operated again subject to PUC jurisdiction, just the way it historically has been. But the staff will be working with the board over time, especially once we do bring it into the public realm, to identify those operating efficiencies that we want to take advantage of. For example, administration in our administration department. Payroll covers the payroll for both what we call the wholesale operation, CLWA, and Santa Clarita. Bringing Valencia Water into the fold, we'll be able to do the same thing there. So we'll be able to eliminate some duplication of effort with respect to payroll and a number of the human resources services. Conservation, right now both entities have conservation departments or part of their operation is devoted to conservation. There's a number of things that we'll be able to essentially consolidate or eliminate the duplication.
I would imagine that when it comes to things like conservation, even if you're not, I don't want to get this technical, but even if you're not operating Valencia Water Company could choose to have CLWA do certain things for it, like conservation programs and that sort of thing, instead of running their own.
Yeah, which we already do for the purveyors as a whole in some respects.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me get off of that. And of course, the 800-pound gorilla, maybe it's just a 400-pound gorilla in the room, but whatever, is the Newhall County Water District. And we've talked about that many times over the years about, even at one point, LAFCO thought that maybe Newhall County shouldn't continue to exist as its own entity. And of course, Newhall County being the only other entity that has its own publicly elected board. But one of the things we've talked about is the fact that Newhall County, it's here in Newhall, it's over here in Castaic, it's over here in Pine Tree, hopscotches around and jumps over the borders of other water purveyors like Santa Clarita Water. And on that basis, I know that there are a lot of connection issues between those two entities, and if we could just run a pipe from here, it'd be a lot more cost effective to serve that sort of thing. And we can have that discussion another day. But is there that same kind of issue at all with Valencia Water? I mean, that issue doesn't even exist with Valencia Water in overlap, does it?
No, the boundaries essentially butt up against each other on Valencia's east end and Santa Clarita's west end. In general, we try to encourage, when I was a retailer, I started out my water career at Valencia Water. We encourage interconnections among the retailers so that, at least in emergency situations, you could operate as a single retailer to ensure that water got to everybody's taps.
Right.
And being able to move water from a retailer to one of the other retailers. So, yeah, that's not an issue as far as Santa Clarita and Valencia is concerned. It's more about realizing the organizational efficiencies than it is about physical efficiencies, because Valencia Water, as part of the appraisal, we took a look at the facilities. Of course, I used to be there, so I know the condition of at least what they were like, when they were half the size they are now. And it's a fairly new system. Santa Clarita's was much older. Newhall County's, in some respects, is much older. So the fact that it's new means there's a lot less wear and tear in those facilities, and once again, it doesn't have that potential for the overlap or duplication that you were just discussing.
What do you see in the future going down the road with respect to solving some of these issues between Santa Clarita Water and Newhall County?
I'm not aware
Depends
of
what you
exactly
mean by
what
issues.
I don't mean political arguments. I mean issues, like the solving some of the problems that have been problems, with deciding who's going to serve an area,
right.
Or solving some of these connection issues.
I think the first thing to point out is that this deal in no way changes or affects Newhall County Water District.
The Valencia acquisition.
Correct.
Right.
Should be transparent.
They will continue to operate independently, and as long as their constituents approve of that, there will be no change. That's
No, I understand
that's-
that. I was asking a different question. I'm asking, I'm moving on to.
Now, as part
I
of
said,
the,
I said it'd be another day, and I guess it's not exactly another. Just really quickly, I mean, do you see any opportunities in the
think
future
what
with
we have
respect to
set
Newhall
up-
County, or?
I think what we have set up now is working fairly well as part of that LAFCO municipal service review that you mentioned. We identified certain areas of growth for each agency. Potential customers in this area would be Newhall County Water District. Potential customers in this area would be Santa Clarita Water Division. And we've already defined those. And don't think there's any further issues as far as, future service.
Right. Got to wrap it up. What do you want to leave us with? And don't say chloride, because I'm going to have you back for a whole nother show and talk about chloride, and let's do that. But what do you want to leave us with respect to this Valencia water acquisition?
One of the benefits that we mentioned, one of the primary benefits, besides water resource management, which I think was our ultimate goal, but one that hasn't been talked about that is important, is local control. 25 years ago this year, the city was formed. That's because we didn't want to have the county supervisors controlling our area. In this case, we have a private entity that pays bonds or dividends to stockholders that are outside this area and who's governed by the PUC. The PUC is a body that's regulated out of San Francisco. So if you have a rate case or a hearing, those all take place up in San Francisco. What this deal will do is it will bring that control back home locally to an elected body, an elected board here in this valley. Every 2 years you'll see our CLWA directors on the local ballot and have that, be able to exercise that control and authority.
So, in other words, Valencia water customers today, unless they want to drive to San Francisco with a problem, don't really have any control. And now they'll be able to, if they have a problem with the water delivery, they'll be able to elect board members, campaign for and potentially elect board members who can come in, take over the board, fire this guy, and they'll be in charge, is what you're saying. Is that a good thing?
Not firing me, but being in charge, yes. Well, and one other thing that I'd like to add, because you mentioned earlier, that at some time ago there were 7 elected and 4 appointed directors. Yeah. With this acquisition, that means there'll be 9 elected and 2 appointed. The 2 appointed representing Newhall County and Waterworks District.
Because after
36.
taking over Santa Clarita Water, it went from 7 and 4 to 8 and 3.
As a result of the running legislation. That's right.
Okay. And those appointed are the County Waterworks District 36 in Valverde, Castaic, Valverde. And who's the other appointed
Newhall County Water District.
Newhall County Water District. And B.J. Atkins was the only person to vote against this Valencia Water Company acquisition, and he did that as a representative of Newhall County Water. Can you summarize for me his argument or his reason for doing that?
The one that he articulated was that they wanted more time to review the proposed transaction. And the board understood that, but also recognized that time was of the essence. And again, this was a transaction between a willing buyer and a willing seller, and the willing buyer being wanting, as Tom mentioned earlier, wanting to negotiate a deal with us and only us.
Right, and you did announce this, I think it was on a Monday, and you did it on a Wednesday.
That's correct.
That seemed like a short amount of time. Of course, to you it's not, because you've been talking about this for a couple of years, but it was a surprise to everybody else, and there you go.
Well, to delay it would have jeopardized the deal. Unfortunately, there were certain protections that we needed to maintain in order to keep the deal. And there were other potential entities out there that may have been interested.
And that's the reason that's an exclusion in the Brown Act for bodies like CLWA or the Hart District or the City of Santa Clarita to be able to negotiate real property transactions and that sort of thing behind closed doors so that you don't jeopardize. And ultimately, I mean, if a couple other suitors came in, potentially the price could go way up, and then you still want to do it, and now you're looking at higher water rates. I understand that, and I didn't want to have to summarize that for you, but we got to wrap this thing up. Dan Masnada, Tom Campbell, thanks for joining us. And thank you for joining us. If you missed any portion of this program, you can see it again and again on SCVTV.com. Check back here, Time Warner Cable Channel 20, AT&T Uverse 99, Sunday 8:30 a.m., Thursday 9 p.m. for another Newsmaker of the Week.